New Music Industry Podcast, and I'm David Angeweeb. Let's dig in.
Today I'm chatting with composer, speaker, and thought leader Steven Lebetkin. How are you today, Steve?
I'm great. How are you today, David?
Great. Thank you so much for asking. So, for those who don't know, why don't you paint us a picture of who you are and what you do?
Okay. Well, I'm a composer, and I've been doing this for quite a long time. I started out in my young teenage years taking composition lessons and studying classical music and going pretty much every weekend to Lincoln Center in New York to the Library of Performing Arts. And as a 13 and 14-year-old young boy, adolescent, I just traveled through the library for years, learning music, listening to vinyl. Yes, those are the days of vinyl. And studying scores. And then went on to college at the City University of New York, Queens College, and had the great privilege and distinction of studying with about five of the great giant composers of the 20th century, unfortunately no longer with us today as we're in the 21st century, and learned a very solid and rigorous background of traditional great Western compositional techniques. And that forms the basis of all of my work for many decades since then, in whatever style I choose to write, whether it's classical, symphonic, popular, commercial, new age, as we're going to be talking about shortly in this interview medium, and in any other framework. So I have a solid foundation of compositional technique, which gives me the ability to build and create in whatever language or style is called for at the time.
That's great. And composing is definitely an art form. You have a new album on the way, and I want to make sure I'm saying this right, although I'm not sure I am, titled Perpetuum Immobile. What can you tell us about it?
Well, it's Perpetuum Immobile.
Immobile.
Which is the, it's correct. It's that's the title track of the album, and the title of that track seemed to get a good sense of what the sound is and mood is on that track for the listener.
So what sort of mood were you trying to evoke with this music?
Well, it wasn't really such a mood. I was actually, I gave a considerable amount of thought and preparation prior to the composition and then ultimately the production of this album to music in the 21st century, particularly for the larger commercial audiences, what's gone on in the last 15, 20 years, and how I could approach a commercial genre with a sense of compositional integrity at the same time, but not losing the audience to something that was too deep or too deeply entrenched in a classical or avant-garde 20th century type of sound. So the idea was consistent with my other works to approach and embrace a much wider audience than classical music generally is able to achieve, which is declining. The audiences are declining. I think that's pretty well established. So the idea was to take a classical set of contemporary techniques, actually a classical set of techniques, and apply them to a very, very appealing set of compositional styles that people can really relate to and enjoy without getting lost. Not too challenging, but just enough so that it bears repeated listenings. That's the key. You want to be able to write music that is not only here for today, but will be here tomorrow, where each time a listener, presses the play button for one or more of the tracks on the album, hears something new that they hadn't heard or focused on before. That's the key to writing great music in the classical vein or the jazz vein or any other vein, so that you could hear it again and derive some additional sense of joy that maybe you didn't get some of the other times.
Yeah, I think that's great because I think a lot of the music that I've come to love certainly has layers and depth to it that I wouldn't have noticed the first time around. And there's many albums like that that I definitely have an appreciation for. I think you described this kind of as new age chamber music. So what is that?
Well, that's a very interesting question. A lot of the new age music, by definition and the way the music is structured and laid out for the listener, has quite a bit of space in it, whether you're dealing with music, let's say by Arvo Part, which has a great amount of repetition, or some of the other contemporary artists like Einaudi and Max Richter and the late Johann Johansson. And so what I did was, and then a lot of the other New Age artists are heavily reliant on sound design and effects to give this kind of ethereal, transcendent, universal feel in a very slow-moving sound palette and environment. So in order to go just a notch or two up in complexity, but without losing the audience, one of the things that I decided to do in the planning of the music for this album is to start from a base level of actual live instruments. Live instruments, of course, are the environment that a lot of great classical music is written in. Of course, chamber music, which gives that intimate sound. You want to be able to give an intimate sound, even if it's on a pair of headsets or speakers. You want to be able to have that sense of human intimacy in music that's not just filled with kind of these ethereal type of sounds and synths and that sort of thing. So the music is in this album built from the bottom up, where the musical ideas are fully formed and accessible, purely and easily accessible to the listener, and then add layers of some combination of instruments, contemporary instruments or traditional instruments, whether it's piano or solo string instruments, and then add the synths on top. So really, what I've developed here is the first subset of New Age music, which I call New Age chamber music. Now, if you go to the internet and type in New Age chamber music on Google search, you're not going to find anything. So that means I'm the first and successful, first of many. If I'm not successful, you'll never find another one again. But that being said, the idea was really to create an album using contemporary sounds and sound designs in a way that maybe Mozart would have done if he were alive today. A lot of his music is great sounds and great tunes and melodies, almost sound like music that was written for a child. They're very, very simple and elegant, but deceptively simple, because the melodies and the musical structure is actually quite dense and complex in Mozart, but it doesn't really sound that way or feel that way to the listener. They don't have to know how complicated it is, but they have to experience it. So I approach this album in much the same way at that level, to give a sense of great appeal, but also wrapped in intimacy and the use of synths and other electronic sound design techniques and samples that would add color, but not become the foundation. Because if all you have is sound design and it's sort of like having a cake, which is 1 inch of cake and 6 inches of cream with sugar. If all you have is the icing and that sugary, cream type stuff on the top, and all you have is cake is at the bottom, you're not going to really eat that cake. You're not going to eat very much of it, and you're not going to really go back for more. But in a chamber music environment, if you have the intimate sound of music that is accessible and has the human touch, and add to that in a very tasteful way, hopefully done tastefully, the contemporary sounds of synths and other production techniques, then I think what you have is something new that, again, bears repeated listenings, by listeners, and hopefully a desire to hear more in future albums.
Yeah, and I think creating that type of music is perhaps more challenging just from a practical standpoint. I would imagine it takes a little more time for musicians to prepare and to have the piece the way you want it, as well as the fact that it could be more expensive to have real instruments as a bass line.
Actually not. You would think that. Well, first of all, when it comes to writing music that is a little bit more higher level, but not too higher level, so as to turn off, a broad audience. What that also does is severely limit the number of composers, other composers in the world, that could approach this new genre, the genre of New Age chamber music, which is what we're calling it here, and make a good faith effort to compose their own version of it. Because you can't really do it unless you have a solid compositional background. Without a foundation, it's going to be very, very hard to do. You could write sort of sounds that kind of dance around it and so on. But if you don't have a solid foundation, there's only a few percentage points of composers in the world that can write out of the box, which is the use of these DAWs, electronic MIDI and sample configurations. Most of them really can't write music at this level, unfortunately. So it's a much more limited market. From a time standpoint, I'm using only a few instruments because the chamber music environment is only a few instruments. That could be 1, 2, 5, or 6 of live instruments. So it doesn't take that long to put together. The composition time is, for me, pretty quick. It didn't take that long to actually compose the tracks for this, and then of course most of the other work in the preparation is on production. That's basically, I think I've answered your question, David.
Oh, absolutely. That's great. You've already mentioned a few artists and composers, but who were you specifically influenced by?
The entire classical world of 300-400 years of music and constant study has always had a great influence on my work. There's no such thing as a favorite composer. I think what makes sense is to be able to say, I love Bach from the Baroque era. I love Beethoven and Haydn and Mozart from their eras. I think it's more about it's really time specific. When we roll forward to the 20th century, composers that had a great deal of influence on me were the music of Bela Bartok, to some extent Stravinsky, Paul Hindemith, and a great composer that is not really well known, Karol with the Karol, Rathaus, Rathaus, who was kind of the Polish Chopin of the first half of the 20th century, died in 1955. He and his music and his teachers, which go back to Bach, not Bach, but Brahms and Fuchs, and later Schrager in Vienna, were firmly based in traditional techniques that go back to Haydn and Mozart. And then rolling forward, Rathaus was the teacher at Queens College in New York, from whom three of some of the most talented composers in the 20th century emerged, and those were Gabriel Fontrier, Saul Berkowitz, and Leo Craft, all of whom I studied with. So that's kind of my lineage. Now, when you kind of look at the flip side of that, David, what were the influences in the 20th, or the 21st century, but from the commercial world? I think there were far fewer of those. I mean, you could look at the film music of composers from the 30s and 40s that went forward, but they really weren't that influential because most of the film music really has as its origination point the influence of the classical composers. And it's funny because many have said my orchestral music sounds like film music, but the reality is, which came first, the chicken or the egg? The film music really came from a broad world of classical music from over the last several hundred years. So I didn't have any one real specific influence that stands out over the last 20 or 30 years that influenced the formulation and composition and production of this album, to the detriment of many other composers of the last 20 or 30 years. So it's really it's really the basket of styles and how they're applied.
Oh yeah, I can relate to that for sure. As a guitarist, I started out liking a lot of classic rock and blues, and then eventually went on to learn jazz and funk, and adopted many different styles from many different guitarists along the way. So I think that's how it...
Well, let's be realistic. Here's the confession. When I played guitar as a 13 or 14 years old, 13-year-old boy, I was picking the licks off of Eric Clapton and Cream, all of those. And
yeah,
because my ear was pretty good, I would be able to hear them and play them back in fairly short order and accurately, while I was also studying, Bach preludes and fugues. So the combination was pretty good. I live in the modern world like everybody else, and I hear and play everything that everyone else does. So I'm influenced by all of those, all those composers, but all of the really good ones were influenced by the composers that I studied with or studied in depth for my entire life. It's really the other way around. They were influenced by the greats. The greats didn't influence them.
Yeah, great point.
So, if you look at Elton John and Billy Joel, great songwriters, Paul Simon, and others, and James Taylor, and others that came, forward through those years, you would see that most of the kind of the songwriting techniques of those composers, which are the ones that just come to mind now in our conversation, really were derived from Schubert and Schumann, Robert Schumann, and other great 19th century composers. Those were the ones that the contemporary composers, the troubadours of the last 20 or 30 years, learned from. I mean, if you dig deep into what they were doing in the 19th century, easily accessible, tuneful, beautifully structured masterpieces of song literature, those are the ones that had the influence on the troubadours of the last 20 or 30 years. That's where it all came from.
Wow. Yeah. That's amazing. So I'm wondering, you have all these influences. Is there a specific way you approach composition and making music?
That's a really, really interesting question. One of the things that I've noted is that there are umpteen number of books at schools, conservatories, and universities used throughout the world on composition. And what they all have in common is the use or manipulated use, depending on the century that they're focused on in those books, these composition books, of harmony. Now, I will say that the use of harmony is a compositional element, but it's not a compositional technique. So when you take out harmony and counterpoint, which are elements of composition, and you strip them out of these books or conservatory courses on composition, you find that there's really nothing left. The art of composition technique, the foundation for it is a specific set of around 8 or 10 techniques which enable one to compose and, more importantly, edit your own work. The young people today, the film composers, the songwriters, are really very weak in their ability to edit. They play the same thing over and over again. It doesn't get better. It's sort of like hitting a golf ball 1,000 times. You can do it wrong 1,000 times. But if you hit, 50 golf balls really, really well, and you can focus on one or more elements of your technique, you'll get better. Well, the same thing goes for composition. The key to being a really good composer, I think, is understanding what composition technique is, as distinguished from and being completely different than harmony and some of the other contrapuntal elements. And most importantly, 2, being able to edit your work quickly and effectively and make it better. What I see from the many media composers that I know around the U.S., particularly in New York and Los Angeles, and composers in the classical world that are competing for these, symphonic commissions, the men or the women. This is not a gender issue at all. This is about the technique. Is that the that many of them have not had the opportunity to study with really wonderful composers that will teach them the compositional techniques, which almost seem secret in nature, but are very specific and clear and evident, and how to edit their work. I don't see composers today as having strong editing skills. You must be able to edit your own work. It's not, if you look at, for example, the book publishing world, if you write a book and you finish your book, you go to a publisher and say, please publish my book. What does the publisher do? Says, all right, here's the contract. Now go down the hall. We have 30 editors here. We're going to edit your book.
Yes.
Why is it that, Now, if you said that to a composer, let's go edit your composition, they would turn all sorts of colors, jump out the window, and rip up your contract for publishing. But they need editing. Why would they not need editing in the same way that a great creative book writer, author, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, would also need some editing? You've got to be able to edit or have somebody do it for you. Mm-hmm. This is the biggest failing of composition in the U.S. and throughout the world in any genre or style or application, be it jazz or classical or songwriting or hip-hop or film or short film or TV. The inability to edit, understand the techniques and how to make it better. This is the thing that's missing. And a lot of what I do in not only in my own work, where my editing skills are pretty good at this point, I can fix what I have fairly quickly. But I try to help others as I meet them, and if they're open to learn the better skills and the craft of musical composition and how to edit their own work. You've got to be able to sustain yourself, and make it better. Otherwise, you're playing golf, you're hitting 1,000 balls in the same wrong way, and your swing will not improve, nor will your composition.
Right. So editing is key. I got that. Is there a specific message you're looking to share with your audience through your music?
There are two kinds of messages. One is the message of, the kind of, I write music from the heart, and I'm trying to express myself, and all of these kind of hoo-ha kinds of things that people say to achieve these dreamy states and seem like they're, heavenly in their approach. I assume that everybody that writes music wants to do the best that they can and express themselves. I think that's a given throughout. So just say that you're trying to do that doesn't make what you say or do any more or less special than anyone else. But what I'm trying to achieve is twofold in the message. If you have a talent, but you wrap it up in technique and you learn your craft, that message, the personal human touch, will come out and will be communicated so that whatever extant messages there are emotionally that a composer wants to convey will reach their destination. They will touch other human beings in a deep and significant way and across large geographic, geopolitical, and other territorial issues. And people from all walks of life will enjoy and hear the music for whatever it is. So, my goals include bringing great music back to the world again, making music really, really great for everyone, to raise the level of music that's written without making it without becoming out of reach of the public, like Mozart would have done, I believe, in the 21st century. He would have written beautifully crafted, elegant music that was tuneful and easily accessible, probably film scores and symphonies and songs of great commercial appeal, and kind of raise the bar. And so So to bring greater joy to a greater public, to hear music and to access music by me and others, touches them significantly and bears repeated listening. And second is to help composers who want to be helped and to learn how to reach those audiences in similar goals in whatever manner of expression that they elect to utilize in their work and their craft. I'll leave you with this thought. People say, what's a great song or a great piece or a great symphony all about? And what I say is, well, it's sort of like a cake mix. And here are the elements. If everything adds up to 100%, 10% of a great piece is inspiration. 89% is craft. And 1% is the hand of God, or whatever you believe in. If all you have is great ideas and inspiration, but you don't know how to craft it and edit it, you're missing 89% of what a great piece would be. You're not going to get there, except occasionally and by luck because you've written some great song or piece or music film or something like that, or a cue, but you're not going to be able to do it consistently. So if you follow that recipe and you learn how to make all of the elements of that piece together, the inspiration, the craft, and of course, a little bit of luck or the hand of God, you will more consistently hit your mark and write better and more beautiful music and bring more joy to the world. That's the goal. And that's what I'm doing in this. That's what I'm doing in this album, and hopefully the world will tell me whether I'm right or I'm wrong or something in between, and I will listen to the reactions of others and hear what people say and how they are moved or not moved this work, and then continue on to take this music and either apply it to other genres like film or TV, whoever asks me to do whatever, back to the concert hall or commercial songs or whatever comes my way, or simply write another, produce another album and go further. So those are kind of the goals and where this album fits into the plan.
Great. And I think we've gotten a pretty good sense of this, but is there anything else specifically you're envisioning for the future? And do you have any specific plans moving forward?
Well, I'm going to roll this one out, for a while. I mean, I could actually produce one of these a month because I write fairly quickly.
Wow.
And edit, produce fairly quickly. It doesn't really take me that long, but the market can absorb, in the commercial sense, as many albums that I could produce at a fairly high, quality level. So while this is rolling out, I have a very busy, more serious compositional life. This year I wrote 2 symphonies, this album, 2 large works for choir, 1 a cappella and 1 with organ. And now I'm writing some art songs for male voice and piano, which is kind of the Me Too movement, but for men. Songs for the Evolved Man is what I'm calling this suite of art songs to show that there are men that are evolved also. And I'm having some fun looking through the literature at poems from Shakespeare on up to the present time for and about men that have evolved in a positive way as human beings. So I'm looking at that and always looking at new projects in the classical world to compose and add to the joy. So that's this year.
Wow.
I write about 2.5 hours of music a year in the classical world for a variety of instrumental and choral configurations. Plus I'll probably do an album or 2 a year of this kind of thing and anything else that comes my way as a result of the reaction in the media world.
Well, that's fantastic. We'll definitely keep an eye on what you're up to. Thank you so much for your time and generosity, Steve. Is there anything else I should have asked?
No, my favorite flavor of ice cream.
What's your favorite flavor of ice cream?
It's a tie for first place. It's generally chocolate, but if I have a good coffee ice cream, I'm in heaven. So there you have my secret.
Awesome.
So if you bring me a couple of pints of ice cream with chocolate and coffee combined, I will write you a symphony and a string quartet.
Wonderful. So yeah, now our guests know what to bring you. Perfect. All right. Really appreciate it.
I'm an easy mark. So thank you, David. Thanks for letting me be on your show.
Yeah. Thanks again. It's been a great conversation.
Have a great day. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks for listening. Make sure to go to musicentrepreneurhq.com for show notes and other goodies, and leave us a review in iTunes to help us spread the word.